So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual coffee lunch and learn session with Jessica Wilkins. Today we are going to be learning about, and I want to make sure I read the title properly here because it is so awesome, how to grow your tech career through writing. Jessica is going to be sharing about how to write meaningful content and connect with an audience, about how powerful that skill is and how building a writing profile can help you grow your network and tech career. So Jessica is here with us. I am going to give you a little bit of summary of who Jessica is if you had not had a chance to meet her. Jessica is a self-taught developer and technical writer from Los Angeles, California. In her previous career, she was a professional oboist, educator, and owner of JDW Sheet music. Jessica's interest in programming came during the pandemic when she wanted to build the Black Excellence Music Project, which celebrates Black artists from the jazz and classical fields. She now works part-time as a junior developer for a small tech company and is a staff author for freeCodeCamp news publication. So without further ado, Jessica.
All right, well, thank you. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we got a little PowerPoint, and then we'll have some Q&A afterwards. And I'm going to get rid of these tools here. Okay, we're going to hide that. Awesome. And click play. There we go. Okay, cool. All right. So yes, this is what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to share my story about how I went from music into tech and how writing is a very powerful skill that we all need to work on and continue to nourish throughout our careers there. All right, so the goals for the presentation, I'm going to talk about how you can share your story to help you get noticed. And so, I mean, there's so many incredible developers out there, whether you're just getting started or you've been in the industry for 20 years, we all have a story. Like, you didn't just materialize out of thin air. And so we all have a past, we all have a background, and it's really important to share that. And that can help you land jobs, get better jobs, and grow in your career. Also, I'm going to talk about specifically technical writing, and how it can give you a deeper understanding of the topics, as well as how important education is, because we're all going to be educators at some point. You might not be an educator in a classroom, but you're going to be teaching people that are coming up behind you there. So it's really important to learn technical writing skills. And then I'm going to talk about how you can build and grow your audience there through your writing. All right, but first, who am I? Like, who is Jessica Wilkins? Who is this little girl sitting on Santa's lap there? Well, as mentioned, I am a professional oboist, and so I did that for many, many years. And this is me on stage at Walt Disney Concert Hall in downtown Los Angeles. And so I performed all around Southern California, a little bit in Canada, a little bit in South Africa and China. And I got my degrees at the Eastman School of Music for my bachelor's, which is in Rochester, New York. And then I went on to do a master's at University of Michigan, which is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And then I moved to Los Angeles to start my freelance career. And so I was performing and doing operas and orchestras and recording sessions. And I was also teaching. So I had a small private studio. I was going into schools, teaching woodwind classes at Burbank and Santa Clarita. I also did a lot of outreach for inner city youth and partnerships with the studios there for outreach programs. And then I also had my own sheet music company. And so this was my company that I ran for about 8 years. It was an online publishing company. We had different composers and arrangers, and I was one of the main arrangers, as well as just running the day-to-day operations and just running around and doing conferences and all that fun stuff. But yeah, so that was pre-COVID. And then COVID happened, March 2020. And everything changed. And so once COVID hit and we were all told to go home, I had a fully booked calendar of conferences and teaching and speaking engagements, and everything was canceled. So that was fun. I had to kind of deal with that. And so the first few months were kind of tough because it's like we didn't know what was going on. But when June 2020 happened, there was a lot of tension going around. I mean, COVID was in full swing, as well as George Floyd's murder that happened in the United States. There was a lot of race relations going on, which led me to how I started learning how to code. And so with George Floyd's murder, it shed some light on some of the diversity issues within different industries, including my own and within the classical world. And so people started asking me, like, what are some Black composers in the classical world that I can learn about? And so I just started sharing different sites, 5, 6, or 7 different sites that I had collected over the years. And I thought there really should be just one area for people to learn about all this stuff. And that's where the Black Excellence Music Project came about. And so I hadn't coded anything before, never really thought about it. And I said, well, maybe I can just create this. I've got some time now. And then when COVID kind of passes over in a couple months, then I can go back to my old life. And well, we know how that turned out. But I decided to create this website. So this is version 2 that I released a few months ago. But it's a site dedicated to Black artists from the past and present, from the classical and jazz worlds. And that's how I started learning how to code. So I really started to enjoy it. And I said, well, let me join a tech community and kind of figure out what this world is all about, because it was completely foreign to me. So I joined the freeCodeCamp forum, and that's where I started writing. I just started sharing my story and just talking about what I was doing as a musician and why I was learning how to code. And so this is a picture of my actual profile here. And my writing, I just thought I was just gonna kind of fly under the radar and just kind of write here and there and engage with a few people, no problem. But I was actually discovered by Quincy Larson, who's the founder of freeCodeCamp, and he reached out to me after I made this forum post, and I just shared a story about some of the parallels that I saw between my 11-year-old beginner student at the time and myself. And she was learning oboe for the first time and kind of struggling with it, because learning any new instrument is hard. And so, but she said, it's going to be hard right now, but I know it's going to get better. And, in a few months, things that are really challenging are going to be really fun for me. And I'm like, hey, that's a cool parallel between what I'm going through, where I'm learning programming, and things that are really hard now are going to be a little bit easier in a few months. And so I shared this post, and Quincy reached out to me, and he was like, hey, let's meet up, let's talk, let's share stories. So we met up on Google Meet, and we just talked for like 45 minutes. And then he said, hey, I want you to join the moderator team on the forum. And I also want you to join the news publication as a volunteer contributor. I said, okay, cool. I wasn't really thinking about the news publication, because I'm like, I don't know, I've only been doing this like 4 months, 5 months. I don't know what to write about. But he said, just write about my story. So that's exactly what I did. So my first few posts were writing about just what I was learning, what I liked about being a beginner. And I wrote this article. This is my second ever published article about my parallels between learning music and learning how to code. And this was caught the attention of Gatsby, and they reached out to me, and they were like, hey, we saw this article, and we have our own blog called Voices of Gatsby. Do you want to get paid to write for us? And I was like, yeah, that's cool. So that led to a paid article, my first ever, and I wrote about fighting back against imposter syndrome, because I dealt with that a lot in the conservatories and performing in Los Angeles. And so there was a lot of parallels between that experience and developers who face imposter syndrome every single day. And so that was the first time I was ever paid to write. And I'm like, I can kind of get used to this. This is kind of cool. So I started writing even more, and it actually led to a developer job. And I wasn't looking at the time, because at this point I think I was like 5 months in, and I'm like, I'm still trying to figure out what JavaScript is, let alone try to look for a job. But this guy reached out to me because he found me on the forum, and this is the actual email with a few details blocked out. But he said, listen, I found you, let's talk, I'm looking for a junior to help me out. And at first I thought it was a scam. I was like, okay, what's the angle? Are they going to ask for like gift cards or something that I'm supposed to send them? But I checked him out, and I was like, okay, he seems legit. And so we set up the meeting, and we just talked for 45 minutes and shared our stories. And I talked about what I was learning. And he said, okay, I'll give you a shot. And here's some projects. You're going to work on some real world projects with some clients, and we're going to meet up once a week, and it's a paid gig. And I was like, that's cool. Okay. So I've been doing that job now for almost a year, and it's been a great learning opportunity. I've been introduced to so many new technologies, working with both front end and back end. And it was all because he found me on the forum, and I was just writing and talking about my story there. And so this also led to me joining the staff officially. I was a volunteer contributor for many months, but then Quincy reached out to me again and said, hey, your articles are doing well, and we're starting up a new author team, and I want you to be part of our staff. I was like, that's cool. I could do that too. So I started writing for them full time as a staff author in August there. All right, so that's a little bit of my story and journey of the past year and some change there. And so now we're going to talk about how you can actually get started with writing or grow your writing and how that can lead to more opportunities. So the first one is an actual personal blog, and there's plenty of ways that you can blog. And so there's different sites like Dev Community or Hashnode or freeCodeCamp, or you can start your own website and you can share your achievements. So maybe you're a career changer and you want to talk about your previous life, like I did, or maybe you've been a developer 20 years and you want to talk about, reflect on that journey and where you want to go in the next 20 years. So everybody has a story. And so you could just share about your story. And you can also share the struggles you've had along the way. So one of the more popular blogs I'm seeing now is people blogging about getting their first developer job. And that's a very real experience for so many developers. And that could actually help you lead into a job. And I saw this happen on the Twitter recently. There was a guy who's really struggling to get his first job, and he's just been blogging about his journey to the point where there's big names within the industry just reaching out and saying, "Hey, how can I help you?" I mean, that's a pretty powerful thing because he was just sharing how hard it was to break in. And people were reaching out and saying, "Hey, how can I help you? I'll look over your resume and I have some suggestions for you." So that's a pretty cool thing. And you can also share lessons that you've learned along the way. And so maybe you started a tech product, or maybe you got fired from a job, or maybe you were at a toxic company and now you're in a better situation, or whatever lessons that you want to share with people. And so it's always important to focus on quality, not so much quantity. And so don't feel like you have to write blog posts every single day or every other day. I mean, work with the schedule that you have. And so if you don't have every single day to write, that's totally cool. Just find some sort of consistent schedule that works with you and focus on quality posts that people actually want to read. And then you can build up an audience from there. And so one of the things is focusing on compelling headlines, because a lot of times we'll read a headline and we'll decide, are we actually going to click on this or are we going to skip it there? And so freeCodeCamp has their own style guide on some personal headline that you can try out. So I copied this from their style guide. And so some of the headlines you could do is like how I did something. So how I built this product with React or whatever, or I did something and then here's what I learned, or I went from this to this, or how I went from, musician to developer in X amount of time. And so those types of stories catch people's attention and they're going to want to click on those headlines there. So crafting a really good headline can mean the difference between if someone actually reads your article or not. And then when we get to actual technical writing, there's a few things. You don't need to be an expert. Okay. So many people say, well, I'm not an expert. Well, guess what? I'm not an expert either. I've been doing this for a really short amount of time, but I'm still writing technical articles. And so you just, you have to just do your research and make sure that what you're writing is authentic and real and factual. And so as long as you know how to do research and read through documentation and come up with your own code examples, then you can write technical articles. You don't need to be some expert in JavaScript for 20 years to write about JavaScript. And so, documentation is really your friend. Don't make assumptions. Don't say, oh yeah, I've worked with this forever and it should return this, because you don't want somebody to say, well, actually it returns this and that's incorrect. And so always triple check with documentation, make sure that what you're writing is actually correct and factual. And then triple check your code examples. So whether you've been working with the technology for years, you're brand new, you don't want to just rattle off some code and then not actually check it. Like run it through an IDE, run it through linters, make sure that there are no errors, there's no crazy formatting, that you have some weird indentation stuff and you're writing on Python and it doesn't work and all that stuff. And so you want to make sure that your code examples are accurate. And so just triple check everything, and so that your writing is credible. And then for project tutorials, this is a big one. Walk through each step thoroughly and explain everything. Do not skip steps. So I actually just went through this where I was doing something with Node and I was reading through an article and they were like, oh yeah, go through this site and then you're going to set up your API keys and then we're going to jump over here. And I'm like, wait a minute, like how do I set all this stuff up? I've never used this site before. And so they skipped like 20 steps and I had to kind of just pause and figure out how to work the site, but instead they could have just walked through that process, but they thought it was just, easy or whatever. And so please don't skip steps. If you're writing about project tutorials, it might be easy for you, but for somebody that's just starting, you want to make sure you walk through everything, including common errors. So for example, if you're writing about Git in GitHub, Don't just say, okay, we'll just set up your GitHub profile and then we're going to jump over here to the terminal and write these commands. Like, you got to walk through how to, set up the profile, how to create a repository, and walk through step by step, because people are brand new to this. And even though you might have done it thousands of times, someone that's brand new to this might not know how to go through that and create their first repository and all that fun stuff. All right, so that's really important. Don't skip steps. And then plagiarism. So this might be an obvious one, or should be an obvious one, but never plagiarize. And so if you have sources that you've used, make sure you credit your sources. Make sure that people know this comes from XYZ source. Don't just copy documentation or someone else's article and be like, I wrote this. And so that's a huge no-no in any form of writing. Right there. And then, of course, compelling headlines, like we talked about with the personal blogs. And so this is some examples of my technical headlines here. And so 25 Python projects for beginners, or 460 free textbooks, or what is full stack development? What is the DOM? What is JavaScript? And so you want to get straight to the point, but you also want to touch on some keywords that people are actually looking for. Okay. And so, for example, if you're writing about set timeout, people might not know, if they're beginners, to say what is set timer or how to use set timeout. They might say how to delay something JavaScript, or delay JavaScript or something. And then it's going to pop up with set timeout. And so if you can strategically work in those keywords of people actually searching for that, then people will find it organically, and that will help get your articles discovered there. All right, another thing is, if your platform supports images, adding good cover images. We've all heard the saying, images are worth 1,000 words there. And so these are, one of the images that I use for an article about coding games for beginners there. And I get a lot of my images from Unsplash. And so that's a great resource there. It's hundreds of free, high quality images. If you're walking through a project that you've built, using screenshots is really good. Or if you're working through, something like VS Code or GitHub or whatever, using screenshots and saying, first do this and do a screenshot, and then this, do a screenshot. And so pictures can really help break up your writing and have a nice flow to your writing there. And so images are always a good thing. Proofreading. All right, this is really important. You got to double check your work and triple check your work. So the basics of just basic spelling and grammar. Okay. So you can't have crazy grammar mistakes, because then people are just going to discount your writing and not take you seriously. Okay. And so you want to triple check everything. And you can also ask for others, if you're brand new to writing, or you just want to share it with somebody before it gets published. You can reach out to the virtual coffee community. You can reach out to other community members and just say, hey, could you just look over this and just, does this flow, this article make sense? And people will let you know. They'll give your honest opinion there, but you don't want to just rattle off some writing and then just send it off and publish it, and then there's all these errors in it. Okay. And then one thing technically I learned in college is to actually print out your articles or your papers, in that case in college, and read it out loud. And you'll catch a lot more errors that way, as opposed to just reading it off a screen and just skimming through it in your head. And so sometimes when you read through things out loud, you'll catch awkward sentence structures, or maybe certain sections don't really make sense and the flow of the article is wrong. And you're like, well, that's weird. Let me change that. Okay, so remember that writing is a process. And so you're probably going to go through several different drafts before you finally hit publish. And it's okay to take breaks. I mean, I do that all the time, where I'll take a break from an article and I'll come back to it, and then I'll touch it up again and then send it off to the editor at freeCodeCamp there. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is writing articles in other languages. So if you speak multiple languages, this is for you. There is a huge, huge, huge need to write good content in other languages, right? Because most content, most documentation is in English. We know that, but there's a lot of content that is needed, especially for beginners, in other languages like Spanish and Portuguese and Russian and Italian and French and et cetera, et cetera. And so if you speak any of those languages, any language besides English, you could start writing content in your native language, and people are really looking for that. And so freeCodeCamp is on a huge mission to translate their curriculum in multiple languages. We had a free World Translation Month, and celebrating that fact. And so they've translated it into Italian, and other languages. But this is a huge thing that people are looking for because it's hard enough to learn programming and you're trying to learn English at the same time. And so there's a lot of people that want to learn programming, but they're intimidated because they're looking at all this documentation and looking at all these forums and it's in English. And so we found at freeCodeCamp when we're starting to translate more languages, we're having more people that speak Italian and French and German and Russian want to start learning programming because that material has been translated into their language and they can learn programming there. Okay, so if you have that skill, if you're multilingual, if you know 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 languages, then I highly encourage you to write not only in English but also in your native language there, and you can develop an audience because I mean the whole thing with networking is that they know somebody and then their people know people and et cetera, and you just don't know what jobs that can actually lead. So yeah, so in conclusion there, writing is your friend. If you forget everything that I talked about, writing is a good thing. It's an important skill and it's something that we should all continue to work on. And everybody has a story. So whether you're brand new to this and you just started 2 minutes ago, or you've been at this for 2 decades, or everybody in between, everybody has something to share. Everybody can write technical articles as long as you do the proper research, as long as you make sure that your writing is authentic, and relatable, then people will read it and you can build an audience. So that's it for my little presentation there. So I'm gonna, oops, stop the share. And oh, we've got a huge chat going on there.
Yes, we do. There was a lots of wonderful comments, so you can take a chance to scroll through that. If you've
Yeah.
got any questions, definitely is now the time to raise your hand. But I did want to ask a question to kind of kick things off and ask a little bit about thoughts regarding doing small videos in your writing for maybe complex steps that like 500 screenshots might not show well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that something that is ideal and potentially a little bit more friendly to do in an article? Thoughts around that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I mean, if you feel like there's going to be too many screenshots there, there's nothing wrong with a little video. And also, what I've been doing too is because FreeCodeCamp uses the Ghost editor, and so you can actually embed like Code Sandbox and Code Pen. And so sometimes if people need to visually see what I'm talking about, they'll say, okay, in this Code Pen example, and I'll break it down, and then they can play around with it and go, oh, okay, that's what she's talking about. Or sometimes I'll just build a project and say, okay, in our project, here's what the final result looks like. And so the last one I did was for talking about the MVC architecture, and I built a little app and just broke down that application so people can see what it was all about. So yeah, but I think there's nothing wrong with having little videos. A lot of the other authors will do that as well. They'll just kind of embed some like YouTube videos in there. Yeah, I think that's really cool. So yeah, what's up, Nick?
Yeah, I was gonna say no, totally agree. Because you're in the context of what you're reading, like when you start clicking on stuff and you gotta open things, so like having the embeds, like you're saying, like the code sandbox or the videos, it's great because like even a YouTube video or Vimeo or whatever is embedded, you can go full screen, but then you can come out of it and you're still in the article. And then I don't know, I'm a big fan of being in the context of where you are and what you're learning, and especially like the code sandbox or any kind of like embedded editor like that, it's nice too because if you want them to do something, it's like literally right in the article too. So it's yeah.
Yeah, and
Also,
I
I
think
really love the talk.
oh, thanks. Yeah, and I think that's really important if for those of you working on documentation, the new React docs just came out, and I think they look amazing, and they have their code examples right there, and you can actually play around with it. You don't have to leave the documentation. So I think it's a huge upgrade, and I can't wait for that to come out of beta and people to start using it there. So I'm going to try to read through all these comments there because there's so many there. Yeah, Sarah.
Awesome. Just as a reminder, the raise hand feature is under reactions if you're looking for it and you have a question. Were you ever discouraged when you first started getting writing, and did you look to like other resources or other writers for some inspiration? How did you just kind of get through that like beginning period?
Yeah. And so in the beginning, the first few articles I had were on like HTML and CSS, and I would talk about like the semantic meanings behind some of the tags. And I was super nervous about how people were going to perceive those articles. And my biggest thing was like, okay, is somebody going to say, well, technically it's this or whatever, and some sort of troll going to come around and just bash my writing. But the thing is, like, there's always going to be trolls, so you can't really control that. I mean, if the majority of people really like your writing, then you're doing a good job. You're always going to have like one or two people that are going to be like, well, technically it should be phrased this way, or or sometimes I'll do like list type articles where I'll say, oh, you do these types of projects or look into these job sites, and then someone will say, well, I think this course is actually better, and I'm like, okay, well, great, So sometimes you can just ignore sometimes people that just want to inject their opinion that's not really constructive. But if it's constructive, I don't I'm happy to listen to it and grow with my writing. But I think that if you see a lot of positive results and you're putting out genuine good content and you're researching everything, then I think you should be proud of the writing, and because there's always going to be people that try to knock you down, but it's just important to just kind of block that out and just focus on the positive results there. So yeah, what's up, Matt?
Hey, thanks, Jessica. Excellent presentation, really nice job. Congratulations too, that's awesome. I just had a quick question about, word limits and, the quantity over quality. And what's a minimum word limit that you might think of? And is there a maximum that you kind of work with? And, what are aspects of, what aspects of quality are you really looking for? I mean, do you have something specific?
Yeah. So I think that in general, like for technical articles, I try to do a bare minimum of at least 1,000 to 2,000, depending on what the article is about. I mean, if like some of the articles I had on like HTML tags, it's kind of hard to write 1,000 words if it's like a really, the tag only has a few, purposes there. And in that case, it's totally fine. But I try to shoot for that like 1,000 to 2,000 when it comes to the technical articles. And for blog posts there, I think it's fine if it's like, I don't know, 600, 800 plus words right there. So I like to just tell stories and start off with a story and then talk about the lesson that I learned. That's the approach that I had with the Gatsby article. I talked about how I wanted to leave the conservatory because I was dealing with imposter syndrome, and my teacher's like, yeah, you're not going anywhere and you're staying. And so then I talked about the lesson that I learned after all of that. But yeah, in terms of length, I think people will read longer articles if the quality is good. And I like to break up sentences. I don't like to have like 5 sentences at a time. And freeCodeCamp actually stresses this point where maximum, like their paragraphs are only like 2 sentences long. So if you read a lot of my articles, it'll be like 2 sentences and then 2 sentences or 1 sentence and then code block and then another sentence and code block. And so breaking that up, then people will tend to read that more. But if they have these like large paragraphs of 5 or 6 sentences, then they're going to go into skim mode and then drop off and probably not read most of the article there. So I would study a lot of like Quincy's writing because he's written like hundreds of articles, and other authors that have been on the publication for a few years now. And that was the structure that I really liked. And I found myself, even when I was writing reading articles, that breaking up those sentence structures and then having it anywhere between like 1,000 or 2,000, but you can also have like a 7,000. There was one article, if you're doing like a longer tutorial, one of the popular ones from one of the other staff authors, Kalade, he wrote a 7,000 word article that's been really, really popular a few weeks ago about how to build your own portfolio site using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so that's one of like the bigger articles that he spent a lot of time working through, but people have been reading through it because of the way he kind of broke everything up with code examples. And so people will read large articles if the content is really good and the flow kind of works out there.
Yeah, 7,000 seems like a huge amount. I mean, that's kind of pamphlet, leaflet type material that you can put in the PDF pamphlet. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Most of the articles are not going to be 7,000. That one just happened to turn into that one for him, at least. But most of mine are anywhere from between like 1,000 to 2,000 words for the technical articles there.
Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. So what's up, Sarah?
I got another question. I'm full of questions today.
Okay.
For and myself, I don't write a lot as much as I used to, and I think I struggle to kind of like keep on that schedule, even though I don't have a lot of time to write as often as I would like. Do you either using it yourself, or are you aware of others who might, lean on someone else or a group of people for like accountability to just put out content and to ensure that you're keeping this skill going and moving forward, especially if you're job hunting or just wanting to share what you're learning? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, one of the techniques that I personally use is I'll just tell people that I'm working on it, even if I haven't started yet. And then people will be like, oh, okay. And then they're expecting it. So then I have to actually do it. So there were some articles this week that I've just mainly been working on some drafts that I've just been sitting in the ghost editor for like a month because I was avoiding them because I'm like, I don't know what to write. But once I talk about it in the meeting, I'm like, oh yeah, and this week I'm going to write about these articles. And they're like, great. And so I'm like, okay, I have to actually do it, because I can't come back like a month later and be like, I'm still working on this, So I think once you kind of declare it, and it works for projects too, where you're like, I'm going to start this project. And then you're like, I guess I have to actually start this project, or else people are going to say, haven't you been working on that for like a year and you haven't gotten started yet? So yeah, so just kind of throwing yourself out there, that's a great way to kind of get started and say, hey, I'm working on this. And that's a great accountability. And then people will be like, oh, cool, looking forward to it. And that kind of gives you that kick to say, okay, I guess I should actually start. So
Yeah, slight, I guess, follow up, but maybe a slight tangent as well to that question. For maybe the larger projects, the larger things that you're working on, the larger things that you're learning, do you ever break things up into like a series of like, I've learned this part of it. So like I'm building a project, but maybe I've got, this part of it done and you want to talk about it, or rather than a 7,000 word
right.
article that you dump at one time.
Right. Yeah. I sometimes will. So I started a series a couple of weeks ago about me going through and talking about the different freeCodeCamp projects, because I see a lot of the same questions come up over and over again on the forum. And I've done a few of the certifications. And so my first one was on the tribute page and giving some tips about like how to work through that and how to break that down. And so this is a larger series because there's like 10 certifications at this point. So that's going to be an ongoing writing project. But I found that when I just focus on one project at a time and then break that down and then tackle the next one and the next one. And so I don't have like a specific like set timeline of when all these are going to come out, but I found that just focusing on one aspect at a time and then writing about it, because I could have written some larger article about here are all the responsive web design projects and here are all the JavaScript projects or whatever. I found like breaking it up into individual articles is a little bit more manageable there for people. So I think that's totally fine if you're working on a certain aspect and saying, oh, I'm building this application and here's what I've learned so far. I think that's perfectly fine there. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I have
Do we
been
have
doing
any
a
other
horrible job
questions?
reading through these questions, reading through the chat. I'm sorry about that.
There's I think a lot of good just compliments, a lot of again, so a lot of love for Unsplash and various things that you've shared with us. So you've shared a lot of great information. I'm glad that we are recording this because I know I'm personally going to watch it again because I'm trying to get back into the habit of writing more like I used to. Oh, and I see we have a hand up.
Oh, cool.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Jessica, firstly, that was a great talk, very well organized. I enjoyed it. I'm also a self-taught newbie, and as someone who hasn't gotten to do any public speaking and writing for a while, and like to do it, how did you balance, learning the code and also, putting out good quality contributions? Because I know with me, I'm always a very believer in the double, triple checking like you had talked about. How did you balance that and, do it well?
Yeah. So throughout this journey, because when I first started, the only thing I was working on was my business. So I was balancing business and writing articles. And then when the pandemic opened up, then I was getting calls to come back and perform. And I was like, okay. So there'd be times where I'd be off like doing a recording session or performance. And then I'd have to come back and it's like 6 o'clock. And I'm like, I still have to code and write and keep that up there. And so I try to just focus on like small little wins along the way, as opposed to these like giant goals. And so I'll sit down and say, okay, I'm going to write a few, paragraphs on this topic that I want to write about. And maybe this week I want to get out this article. And because in the beginning, I just wrote an article every now and again. I didn't really write a whole bunch throughout the week. It was just whatever my schedule allowed for. And then once I joined the staff, then I started writing about 3 or 4 per week there. But I would just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to balance this out between the smaller articles versus some of the larger ones. And so sometimes I'll just be working on a draft and it might not be ready yet, but at least I've kind of chipped away at it, and then it'll be published in a week or 2 or something like that. Or some of the smaller articles, I'll just focus on that and write that within a couple of hours and kind of send that off. So I try to balance between some of the smaller articles versus some of the larger ones, where I'm like, I don't really know what to write about. So this week I've just been working on some of those larger articles. So I haven't published anything this week, but I let my editor know, like, hey, I am working, just FYI. So that's why you're not getting anything from me right now. But you'll get it like next week there. So as long as like you're coming up with a small game plan and just focusing on little wins along the way, as opposed to this giant goal, I think that's more manageable there.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, we have any other questions for Jessica? I know I could speak at length and continue this topic. It's very interesting for me. I don't want to hog the floor, but I also want to make sure that if we do have questions, that they do get answered. Just to follow up, Jessica, are you available to answer any questions in Slack? Since obviously you're a virtual coffee member, this is a members only event. Everyone has access to ask you questions if they think of anything later, or if someone watches this recording later and thinks of something.
Yeah, I mean,
definitely
you can always private message me and whatnot, and I feel like I get back pretty quickly with messages there. And so yeah, if you have a question, you can just shoot me a message, and I'll kind of come back when I can there. But yeah, cool. Helen, what's up?
Hey, what's up? Thanks for doing the talk. I can't wait to listen to the recording. I was just curious, from your experience, do you think some of the developers, I'm thinking about writing, using writing as a way to reach out to developers and stuff. I was just curious, do you think that it had to be all about tech or technology, or about some framework, or do you see a trend with developers interested in more the business side of things and understanding some of the why behind, and not from the developer perspective, but maybe looking from a customer's perspective, from a founder perspective, and all the other stakeholders that they kind of like collaborate with, whether subconsciously or consciously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those types of articles are awesome. And I mean, so like if you've worked on other products in the past, or maybe you have your own company, or you're toying around with some software product, and you want to talk about the lessons that you've learned along the way, and so any time you can just share what you're going through, people will read it. And there are times where people are just talking about, oh, I have this idea, and I've had a few false starts, but here's where I'm at now, or I'm trying to get funding for my project, or this is what I'm dealing with customers and stuff. And so as long as it's like well written and engaging, then the other developers will pick it up. And I've seen on Twitter especially, where people will write about just their journey about products that they started, or maybe they're launching a new framework and they're trying to get it off the ground, and not a lot of people are noticing it, and so they're talking about that. And by them talking about those struggles about starting a new technology, then it kind of introduces their new technology and product, and people are going, oh, okay, cool, let me learn about that. And so through that writing, and I would use this too when I was running my sheet music company, I would occasionally write blog posts about, new music or stuff that I was going through at the time, and people, that was a way to introduce them to my company, because there was like a person behind the company. I wasn't some like giant, corporate entity. It was just me, just writing sheet music and all that fun stuff there. So it's another way to kind of connect with other developers there.
Got you. I just have one more question. I was wondering, how would you advise a developer or to write or package those false starts and false positives, those failures, without losing credibility? But instead, you know what I'm saying? Because that is, it's kind of, that's my only nervousness about it. It's like, I don't care if somebody call me a loser. I'll just scream back your mama. But I don't want to not miss out on a customer or miss out on a potential hire down the line, or, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of power when you're being vulnerable and saying, hey, I failed at this, or I did this. And you'd be surprised at how people would respond. I mean, there was one powerful post that came about where there was a senior developer that posted to the forum and talked about how they felt like they weren't a senior developer and they weren't a good programmer. And they had this long post, and so many people, they were talking about they were going to quit. And so many people reached out, and because he had shared some of his work and stuff, and we're like, hey, you're an awesome developer. Like, we were looking at your GitHub and your projects and your, like, this is, and because he was saying that he was going to quit and not, do it anymore. And so being vulnerable and talking about your failures, I think that could really work in your favor. And you'd be surprised how people will come about and say, hey, let me see your work or check this out, and want to connect with you. And that could lead to other opportunities. And so it was great to see him, and it's great to see somebody that was so far along. I think he was like 15 years into his journey, and he didn't feel like a real programmer. And so many people were reaching out to him. So many people that were never actually active on the forum that much before were reaching out and checking out his work and, contacting him privately. And so it was great to see him be vulnerable. And so I don't think there's anything wrong sharing, the failures along the way. I've talked about failures that I've had in business and in music, and how people have reached out and offered me gigs and offered me, more money, or bought music. And one of the last blog posts I did for my sheet music company was talking about the pandemic and how I was dealing with it, and how I said, well, I have these, free music for people that are struggling just like I am, dealing with the pandemic. And so many people came out of the woodworks and they said, thank you for responding as a human. And it upped my sales, because I was just responding as a human there. And so because I was open and talked about how I was struggling and all that. And so there've been plenty of times I'll share about what I've been through, and people will respond in positively, and get me more customers, because I think people just want to interact with a human. And I think that's where we're moving to. And we're kind of moving away from like that, not moving away, but people want to see more humans behind businesses and products, as opposed to just like this conglomerate, and so, yeah, if you've got some stories to share and struggles, people want to hear that. And you'd be surprised who would reach out and might offer you some work there. So yeah. Cool. What's up, Deborah?
Hey, Jessica, great presentation. Love it. We'll definitely be rewatching. So thank you for sharing with us today. My question is, what are your thoughts or views on the whole saturation of it all? Like, especially as a newbie developer, like, a lot of newbie developers are trying to write to get into the industry and stuff like that. And you will see a lot of the, newbie posts like, how do you do this? Or ways to learn this? Or, 10 resources to learn to code, stuff like that. So, there's so many blog posts out there about the same topics. And if you're writing, you kind of feel like you're writing about the same thing that 100 other people have written about. And you're just coming into this now, but people have been doing this for so many years. So you kind of feel like you're roped in, and, 100 people have written about this before. So why would anybody want to read another post about the same thing? So do you ever feel like it's saturated because everybody's kind of writing about the same thing? Yes, you're going to share your story or how your journey on it, but you kind of also feel like everybody has read about this before. So why would somebody want to read one more post about the same thing? Because you're not really saying anything different per se. Like, do you feel it's saturated? Because I have done maybe like 4 blog posts, and this was like a year ago. And I kind of don't write anymore just because I don't know what to write about. But you also feel like you're writing about the same thing. So like, why would somebody want to read this? Because 200 people have written about it already. So I hope that question makes sense. I'm going to stop like rambling now.
Oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense there. Yeah, I mean, I get that all the time because when I joined the author team, they assigned me articles to write. When I was a volunteer, I could just pick whatever I wanted to. And so one of the latest things was talking about SQL. And I had, at that point, had never worked with it. I only worked with Mongo. And so I was like, well, what am I going to write about? And what kind of like how am I going to go about this? Because there's already plenty of articles on that. And I'm just like, I don't know what to do. But I decided to just kind of inject, my own examples, musical examples, or just funny examples that I found, and kind of weave that into some of the headlines there. And so just kind of having your own spin. I've seen some really creative articles about talking about like async and await and different things in Python and whatnot. And they'll find like a cute way where they're like, learn about databases with puppies or something, or they'll have like some sort of like stick about that. And so a lot of my articles, I'll use like music examples, or I'll just come up. I actually think I did one on like a puppy database or something. And so so just finding like a creative spin on something that's been written about over and over and over again can really help you kind of break through there. And then also like the cover image, if your writing platform supports that. So I've seen some really creative artwork from some of the volunteer contributors on the news publication, where I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And just based on the image, I'll want to read the article there, and the cool headline where I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about that before. And so I think just the power of like headlines and images and just having a unique spin on that topic can kind of help you break through there.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool. Yeah.
That was some really, really, really good advice. Lots of great conversations, and really, I think everyone's agreeing that even if something has been written about several times before, just write again, because I mean, we all want to have puppies as an example.
Yeah, exactly.
Always want to learn about puppies.
Exactly. Yeah. So just come up with your own examples there, and just whatever fits your personality. And so a lot of my examples are going to be obviously music based, but hey, that works for me there. So
yeah, and you're going to reach everyone with a potential music background that can understand things in a new way, and is not reading the same fizz buzz, foo, bar, all those words that just especially are daunting and can be kind of confusing whenever you're entering this space for the first time. So instead put puppy, kitty, duck, and realize that these are just filler words. These are just things we're going to talk about, and it can help some difficult things make sense.
Exactly. Yep.
Awesome. So we are 10 minutes to the hour, actually 9 minutes, time clock just changed. So I do want to be definitely respectful of everyone's time. If we have like a final question that Jessica can answer, we definitely still have time for that. If not, we can wrap things up. So I'm going to pause for a moment. So pause is painful, but I'm learning to give space for people to talk. All right, that feels good. As always, if you have any questions or want some assistance with anything, Virtual Coffee is the community there for you to support you as you grow and learn the tech community. We all come from many different backgrounds. We all have many different experiences in life, and it's one reason why being in this community is so amazing. We're here to help and here to support. I feel like a lot of people are going to come away from this Lunch and Learn with a renewed desire to start writing. I know myself, I'm doing that now. I'm planning my next articles in my head. I'd love to see other people share their articles as well. So I just want to give a big round of applause, virtual round of applause to Jessica for your time, for this information, for the inspiration as always. And we look forward to, everything else that you could support us with.
Cool. Well, thanks. This has been cool. I like this.
Yes.
Thanks, Jessica. It's a great way to segue into our blogging challenge for November.
Oh, well,
Yes.
there we go. I totally planned that. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I will see everyone at the next Lunch and Learn. If you have, as always, any ideas or even would like to see a Lunch and Learn about something, raise it in Virtual Coffee. We have conversations every day around things that we might want to share. There was just recently some talk about presenting old technologies, the way that we used to do things 10 years ago, 20 years ago, to really understand the evolution of where we are now, why we do things the way we are now. So there is space for you to share everything. And again, you don't have to be an expert in something. You can share a project that you've learned. It's why we're here together. So, all right. I will wish everyone a happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care, everyone. Bye.